So welcome back. Our next understanding in the understanding of how to read the Act will be on what are rules, what are circulars, what are notifications. Can I read just the Act to understand what the government wants to convey? No. So what they've done is, companies like Taxman, companies like Bharat and all the leading houses have compiled 3 books for you. One book is called the Act. The second book, they've compiled all the rules made by Central Board of Direct Taxes and enforced by the government through notifications. We call that the Book of Rules. And the last one they have is for all the case study that has come over the years, all the notifications that have come, all the circulars that have come. Tomorrow, if advice needs to be given on a particular section, you can't just give it based on your reading of the Act. You will have to read the Act, the provisions, all the rules made under that section, all circulars, notifications ever given for that section, and the case study that has come on that section. They say Income Tax Act in India is one of the lengthiest acts to study. So for the moment, we have to understand how this act is functioning. Now, before we understand who makes the rules, we need to understand how the hierarchy of the department functions. So we're going to take a small chart on what is an income tax authority. The word income tax authority is also, as I said, defined in the Act, this time under section 116. Now the income tax authority will be used in a lot of sections. For example, we have section 154. करेंगे बाद में. It is called rectification of a mistake apparent from the record. That means if an income tax authority has passed an order and in that order there is a mistake, then to correct that mistake, they need to use the powers of section 154. Okay, let's understand a small concept. In India, I think the most common and the most widely watched sport is cricket. So I'll talk to you about cricket. Now in cricket, how many bouncers can a fast bowler bowl in 1 over? Your answer could be 1, your answer could be 2, and your answer could be as many number. But if you've noticed while watching the match, after 1 bouncer, there is a signal the umpire makes, shoulder length, 1 gone. So the bowler can bowl maximum 1 as per rules at that time, and sometimes in some tournaments there are 2. Why? After 1 bouncer, does his shoulder start paining? Or is he not allowed to do that as per rules framed by ICC? Similarly, in certain tournaments you've seen, there is this review system that if the batsman is out or not, the batsman can question the umpire's decision by referring to the third umpire. But that was there in the World Cup. It's not there in the current series that is going on. Why is that? Because the rules keep changing. So what the umpire can do and what the players can do will be decided by the rules framed by ICC. Now if I take the same example in income tax, what the department can do and what the assessee can do will also be defined in the Income Tax Act. Can the officer of the department walk into my house any day and check whether I have cash stacked away or not? Can I just walk up to the department and ask them to show me my file. All these powers, all these rights, all these duties will be defined in the Act itself. So we have what we call assessment procedures. Now, in the assessment procedures, which we will be doing in the course of this study, we will learn the powers of the department and we will learn the powers of the assessee. And what happens if one misuses the powers? What happens if the assessee does not fulfill his obligations? Then there are penalties and there are interest. But whatever it is, जो भी है, सब act बताएगा. You are not supposed to use your common sense. You are supposed to read the act and understand what it is that the government wants us to convey to the public. What we are learning right now is who is the income tax authority. So, we go to section 116. Now, section 116 says CBDT is an income tax authority. So, tomorrow, if you're asked a question, can CBDT rectify its order under section 154? I know, beta, you don't know 154 as yet. I know that. But I just told you 154 is a section under which an income tax authority can rectify a mistake in an order. You answer the question, can CBDT rectify that mistake? Can CBDT rectify a mistake? Because CBDT is an income tax authority, therefore CBDT ने अगर कोई order pass किया, then if an order is passed by CBDT, they can rectify it under section 154. The Chief Commissioner of Income Tax or the Director General of Income Tax. Then we have Commissioners of Income Tax, Directors of Income Tax and Commissioners of Income Tax Appeals. You have Additional Directors, Additional Commissioners and Additional Commissioners of Appeals, Joint Commissioners, Joint Directors, Deputy Commissioner, Deputy Commissioner, Deputy Director, Assistant Directors, Assistant Commissioners, Income Tax Officer, Tax Recovery Officer and Inspectors. Now with the growing functions and scope of the Income Tax Department, Finance Act 14 added extra posts to the Department of Income Tax. They came up with the Principal Director General of Income Tax, Principal Chief Commissioner, and then there are Principal Commissioners of Income Tax. Now, remember there are different posts. We've done that the Director General has administrative powers sitting in the ministry. You have Director General or Principal Director General Administration. You have Principal Director General Systems. You have Principal Director General HRD. Principal Director General Logistics. That means these are involved with coordinating the various functions of juniors below them. We have Legal and Research. Similarly, we have Principal Commissioners. These are going to be region wise of, let's say, Andhra region. You have Bihar and Jharkhand region. You have Delhi region. You have Principal Chief Commissioners Gujarat region, Karnataka, Goa region, Kerala region, MP, Chhattisgarh region, Mumbai, Nagpur, Northeastern region, Northwest region and so on. So what they've done is an additional post of Senior Chief Commissioners and Senior Director Generals are now going to come to the post of the Principal Director General or the Principal Chief Commissioner. So what they do is in the Andhra region they will have Chief Commissioners and below them Commissioners, and we have Deputy, Assistant, Joint Commissioners. So this post of the Principal Chief Commissioner will coordinate all the ranks below them so as to facilitate better working of the Department of Income Tax. So wherever in the Act the word Commissioner is mentioned, we will include the word Principal Commissioner. Wherever in Income Tax the word Chief Commissioner is mentioned, we will use the word or include the word Principal Chief Commissioner, and similarly for Principal Director General. So एक hierarchy बनाई हुई है. The logic being, now the Ministry of Finance is run by headed by, I should say, the Finance Minister. Now, the Ministry of Finance has incorporated CBDT and there is CBEC, Central Board of Direct Taxes and Central Board of Excise and Customs. This body looks after income tax, call them direct taxes. CBEC looks after excise, customs, service tax, and so on. What does looking after mean? Once an act has been made, now remember, people sitting in the office in the ministry have made an act. I'm going to be reading that act, sitting in my home, in my office. I have to give advice. Sometimes reading the act leads to confusion. Sometimes I don't know the details. All this will be catered to by the CBDT. Under the CBDT, they have divided it into chief commissioners based on geographical area, all notified by CBDT. Depending upon a state like Delhi, will have about 5 chief commissioners who will be reporting to the Ministry of Finance. They can increase or decrease depending upon the ministry's decision. The chief commissioner will have people working under him, commissioner of income tax. Then we have lower authorities. Each of these have been allocated functions to be performed. But we keep hearing a very common term called assessing officer. So today we are going to look at only who is an assessing officer and a brief overview of the functions. Obviously, as I keep saying every time again, don't get worried, we will be doing each of these in detail. Today is your first introduction to these terms. So we say, we have the Finance Minister heading the Ministry of Finance, CBDT, for implementation of direct taxes. Chief Commissioner will report to the CBDT or the ministry. Now, under the Chief Commissioner, we have the Commissioner of Income Tax and we have the Commissioner of Income Tax Appeals. The Commissioner of Income Tax is the administrative function, looking after the implementation at the grassroots level. The Commissioner of Income Tax Appeals is the commissioner who listens to the problems of the assessee. So if an assessee files a return, I have calculated my total income as per my understanding of the Income Tax Act. Maybe I have made a mistake. Somebody should be checking whether my total income calculated is actually as per what it should be. That person checking the return is called the assessing officer. वो assessing officer कौन है? Is the chief commissioner going to be checking my return? Is the commissioner going to be checking my return? No, they are senior people. So who's an assessing officer is given to us under section 2 subsection 7A and 124. Now the assessing officer means assistant commissioner or deputy commissioner or assistant director or deputy director or an income tax officer who is vested with the relevant jurisdiction by the virtue of directions or orders issued under section 120. Now section 120 CBDT has the powers to authorize certain people to perform the function of the AO. So we have two words. One is the word called post and the other is the word called function. The posts are given under section 116. The assessing power is a function performed by some of these posts. So for example, we say the joint commissioner, the assistant commissioner or the deputy commissioner and the ITO. Thus, as we can see, the task of the assessing officer, the assessment of the income of the assessee is not done by the chief commissioner or the commissioner, but it is a function designated to some of the junior ranking officers of the department, some not so junior. You have the joint commissioner, you have the assistant or the deputy commissioner, and you have the ITO. Now, the size of the return or the income disclosed in the return will determine which of these posts become your assessing officers. All these are directions given by the CBDT, which you can do after you've joined the profession and are into practice. At our level, it is only of academic consequence. If the return is above a certain limit, then the Joint Commissioner will be the AO. If the return is below a certain limit, then the ITO will be the AO. And of course, if the return is between those two limits, then it will be the AC or the DC. Who will determine those limits? The CBDT. Now, the framing of the law, the policies, the changes that are required to be made in the Act. Sometimes law has been made, but when people read it, there is ambiguity. It is not clearly readable, it is not clearly understandable. I will give you examples as we move on. Then CBDT needs to clarify how that law is supposed to be read. Now, who's going to make all these changes? Who's going to work over there? So, the post of the Chief Commissioner has an equal in the Director General. The post of the Commissioner has an equal in the Director. Similarly, for the Additional Director, Joint Director, Assistant or Deputy Director. Now, these are people who are not sitting in the department and implementing the Act. They are sitting in the ministry. They take part in what we call the law-making function. Now, obviously, the Finance Minister is not making the law on a daily basis. So, these are the people sitting in the department who will be making or recommending the changes, making the changes, and of course, those will then be implemented by the Finance Minister on behalf of the government by something called notification in the official gazette. So, we said they sit in the Ministry of Finance, while these guys sit in the department and deal with the public. So, to sum it up, the Income Tax Act defines the Income Tax Authority. I gave you an example. I said section 154, which talks about rectification of a mistake apparent from the record. Section 154 says that an income tax authority, if an income tax authority finds a mistake in an order passed by it, then the income tax authority can rectify that mistake. What mistakes, how they can be rectified will come in the assessment procedures. But the question will be, can the CBDT or the Commissioner of Income Tax or the Commissioner of Income Tax Appeals rectify their mistakes in the orders passed by them under section 154? The answer will be yes. Why? Because all of these come in the definition of income tax authorities under section 116. The question is the Income Tax Appellate Tribunal an income tax authority? As we've read section 116, we've realized the Income Tax Appellate Tribunal is not an income tax authority. Therefore, can the ITAT rectify its order under section 154? The answer will be no. Because, as I told you, section 154 says only an income tax authority can rectify its orders passed by it under section 154. So, to look at the hierarchy of the department, we have the administrative function being performed by the Chief Commissioner, the Commissioner, the assessing officers, and once the order of assessment has been passed and there is some tax to be recovered, there are tax recovery officers who will start the recovery proceedings. Now, let's look at what happens if I file a return and disclose my income at, let's say, 10 lakhs. So, I file my return and I say my income is 10 lakh rupees. This is my total income. Whatever tax I have, I pay. Now, is someone going to check this return? Like we said, the assessing officer is going to check these returns. How can he check the returns? What are assessments? How many types of assessments are there? again we will do when we do assessment procedures. At the moment we are learning that it is the assessing officer who will check my return. And suppose he says he makes an addition of 3 lakh rupees. He feels that there is an expenditure of 3 lakhs which I had claimed as a deduction, but as per the assessing officer it is not allowable. Because the act is so vast, there is a difference in the understanding of those reading it. In the next section we will be talking about interpretations. So maybe as per my understanding that 3 lakhs was allowable, but maybe as per the understanding of the AO that 3 lakhs is not allowable, so he added it back. Now I want to contest this. I say this addition is wrong. Can I go to the High Court straight away? Should I go and file a case in the Supreme Court? Or does the Income Tax Act give me a procedure for filing the application of appeal? Now, Income Tax Act says the first appeal will go to CIT appeals. So like we discussed, in the department itself, the Commissioner of Income Tax has been divided into 2 posts. One is the administrative function looking after the functioning of the lower authorities. The other is the appellate function. That means against an order of the assessing officer, the first appeal will go to CIT appeals. Which means what? So as an assessee, I will make an application. There is the procedure how you make memorandum of appeals, grounds of appeals. I will raise the point that this is how I filed my return, this is the addition made by the AO, and this is why I feel that the addition made by the AO is not correct. All the reasons will be given to me, and I will give it to the CIT appeals. CIT appeals will examine it, call for the AO, discuss it, and then give an order as to his opinion on reading the Income Tax Act, whether it should be added back or not. So how it goes is, the CIT appeals will then pass an order. The order can be in favor of the department or it could be in favor of the assessee. It could be in favor of the assessee. Now let's assume we say against the order of AO, you filed an appeal. Now who will file an appeal? Obviously, AO ka order hai. I'm sure you'll agree with me, the AO will not file an appeal. So usually the appeal will be filed by the assessee. Filed by the assessee. The first appeal, we call it, will be filed by the assessee. Now, assuming the assessee gets a judgment in his favor, that means now the CIT appeals has said that the addition of 3 lakhs should not have been made. Obviously, the department, now the department is going to be represented by the Commissioner of Income Tax. AO directly appeal mein nahi jayega. The AO will not file an appeal directly. The Commissioner of Income Tax will file the appeal on behalf of the department. Now the next appeal will then be filed to the ITAT, Income Tax Appellate Tribunal. Now the tribunal is an independent body having jurisdiction over an area, and the tribunal will then hear the department and the assessee and consider the judgment of the CIT appeals and give its own understanding of whether that 3 lakhs should be added or not. Can the ITAT overrule the judgment of the CIT appeals? I repeat again, all these things, all the powers we will do in assessment procedures, but just a basic. Yes, the ITAT can. So let's assume the ITAT now gives it the judgment in the favor of the department. Now the assessee is not very happy. So can the assessee now file to a higher body? yes, the next appeal will then be filed to the High Court. Now remember, every state has a High Court. Now the jurisdiction of the High Court is within that state. So the High Court now gives an order which could be in favor of again either the assessee or the department. Can the ITAT's order be overruled by the High Court? The answer is yes. Assuming the ITAT again gives a judgment in favor of the assessee. Now the assessee is happy, but the people in the department are not so. So the next appeal can then be filed to the Supreme Court of India. Now what will the Supreme Court do? Again, the assessee will put his point, the department will put their point in favor of their own respective points. The Supreme Court will take into consideration the entire appeals before the High Court and then give its own interpretation of the Act. Now once the Supreme Court gives an interpretation, let's say it was in favor of the assessee, that means the addition of 3 lakhs will no longer be valid because the Supreme Court's decision is valid across the country. Now what can the department do? Nothing. They will sit over there. But can the decision of the Supreme Court be overruled by the ministry? And the answer is yes. How will the ministry overrule? They will make an amendment in the Act. The best example I can give you is the Vodafone judgment. And somewhere when we are discussing accrual and deemed accrual, we will take into detailed points on what happened in the Vodafone judgment and how it involved an interpretational point of view. Vodafone won the case in the Supreme Court. What happened then? Our finance minister, Mr. Mukherjee, then made a retrospective amendment in law and overruled the judgment of the Supreme Court, which became one of the more debatable retrospective amendments we've had in our country. A much criticized retrospective amendment as well. But the fact is, can the government do it? The answer is yes. So looking at finally the hierarchy of the department before we move on, we have the Ministry of Finance, which has CBDT. The CBDT works with the Director General, Director, Assistant, Deputy, all these people sitting in the ministry, making changes in the law, looking at judgments of the Supreme Court which are not, in their view, according to the intent of legislature, which then can be made into changes or amendments in the Act. And the other is the income tax authorities sitting in the department, making sure that the Act is implemented, making sure the assessee is actually following the rules framed. Assessing officer is the one who assesses the income of the assessee. Assessing officer is not a function, it's a post. Once an assessment order or an order of the AO has been passed, penalty order, appeal against this order will first be filed with the CIT appeals. Appeal against the order of the CIT appeals will be filed with the ITAT. Appeal against the order of the ITAT can be filed with the High Court and thereafter with the Supreme Court. Once the order of the Supreme Court is passed, there is no further appeal in this land because the Supreme Court is the highest judicial authority. But the judgment of the Supreme Court can also be overruled by an amendment in the Act. So having understood the hierarchy of the department, we now move on to understanding what are rules, what are circulars, and what are notifications. Now, what are rules? Sometimes the finance minister introduces a section making something taxable. For example, section 17(2), most of you will remember this from IPCC. said the value of rent-free accommodation, the value of rent-free accommodation is chargeable to tax. So when you open the section in the Act, you will find it written over there, the value of rent-free accommodation is chargeable to tax. Now what is rent-free accommodation? Employer has given a house to employee to reside. That means the employee is not paying a rent. Now that is chargeable to tax as per the Act. But how much is the rent that should be taxable? In different localities across the country, there will be a variation in the rent and there will be a debate on how much is the rent of that house. So to avoid these debates, for valuation of perks, we have a rule 3. Now what happens is, the CBDT will frame rules on how the perk will be valued. For example, if you remember, for a government employee, there was a license fee that was to be determined by the government. For a non-government employee, you had to check what was the population of the city. And then there was either 15% of salary or 10% of salary or 7.5% of salary. All of these, the valuation, the perks, the motor car perk from IPCC, you will remember, 1800 per month, 2400 per month. All of this is not given in the Act. It's given in the rules. So what are rules? Now rules elaborate the Act. The power to make rules has been given to the CBDT. Some of the rules we have are Rule 3. For example, if you look at Rule 3, valuation of perquisites. Then we have Rule 4, unrealized rent. Remember, there is a deduction allowed from the de facto rent or the actual rent for the rent that the assessee could not recover, something called unrealized rent. That deduction will be allowed. This is written in the Act. But the conditions on the basis of which the deduction will be allowed is given in Rule 4. So rules, we say, are framed by the Central Board of Direct Taxes, which works, as we know, under the Ministry of Finance for the administration of the Income Tax Act. The CBDT frames the rules for elaborating the provisions of the Act subject to the control of the central government. Now the CBDT can make a rule, but they cannot enforce a rule. So the enforceability of the rule will come through a notification, which the government takes out in the official gazette. So for example, section 17(1) states that the value of rent-free accommodation is taxable in the hands of the employee. However, the section does not state the method of computing the value of the rent-free accommodation. For the same, the CBDT has issued Rule 3. So as per section 295 of the Income Tax Act and section 46(1) of the Wealth Tax Act, power has been given to the CBDT to make the rules for carrying out the requirement of the Act. The rules made by the board in exercise of the powers conferred to it thus have statutory force. Are the rules to be compulsorily followed? Yes, because the Income Tax Act authorizes the CBDT to make the rules. So the Income Tax Act is giving the power. I hope you are listening to me. The Income Tax Act is giving the power to the CBDT to make the rules. And these are enforced by the central government in the notification in the official gazette. Thus, rules are enforced by notification by the central government in the official gazette. For example, I can give you an example over here. These are rules framed under section 35 CCD. Now, one of the more important points you will remember is that a rule framed under one section cannot be read with another section. For example, employer has given an employee a house to live in. The employer has given an employee the house to live in. To value the perk, I can read Rule 3. But if the firm has given a house to live in to the partner, now remember, the partner is not an employee of the firm. Any perk received by the partner from the firm will be valued under section 28. Any perk received by the partner from a firm will be valued under section 28. Business head mein aisa likha hai. It is written under the business head. Can we use rule 3 to value that perk? The answer is no. Why? Because you need to learn that rule framed under one head or one section cannot be read with another section unless the framing body says so. So in exercise of the powers, this is one of the notifications that has come in 2014. It is notification number 16. Under section 35 CCD, when we read business head, you will find out the Central Board of Direct Taxes hereby makes the following rules further to amend Income Tax Rules 1962, namely, and so on. Obviously, the rules continue. I am just giving you the wordings of the notification number 16 2014, which has enforced rules made under section 35 CCD. Now he says, since the rules are meant only for the purpose of carrying out the provisions of the Act, it cannot take away or whittle down the effect of the enactment itself. The rule can be made only in agreement with the provisions of the Act. Can the rule change the Act? No. I told you the rule is only meant to elaborate the Act. So the rule cannot change the Act. If the Act says this section or this perk is taxable, the rule cannot say it is not. Or if the Act says this perk is exempt, the rule cannot say it is taxable. As I said, the rule cannot change the Act. The rule can only elaborate the Act. They must be interpreted in the light of the section under which they are made. I give you an example. The rule has to be read under the section for which it has been made. Thus, Rule 3 must be read with section 17(2). It cannot be read with section 28. So, any perk received by a professional or a businessman, any perk received by a professional or businessman cannot be valued as per Rule 3. If there is a conflict between the provisions of the section and the relevant rule, come on, think about it and tell me. If section and rule are conflicting, then which one is to be overriding which one? I think you guessed it right. It has to be the section. The provisions of the section shall prevail. Thus, a rule cannot be made contrary to the object and the provisions of the Act. A rule cannot create a limitation or other condition not sanctioned by the Act. That means the rule cannot override the Act. A rule cannot be framed contrary to the principle of natural justice. A rule has to strictly confine itself to the subject matter for which the rule-making authority has been empowered by the enactment. So, for example, if the government says that the rule has to be framed only for valuation of perks, then the rule must be framed only for the valuation of perks. And a rule has no retrospective operation. A section in the Act can be made with retrospective effect, but the rule cannot have retrospective effect. So just a few things we have over here. What's a rule? A rule is elaboration of a section. Who makes the rules? The CBDT as empowered under section 295. Can the rule change the Act? No. The rule has to be read under the section for which it is framed. Once a section is amended in the Act, there will be directions given to the CBDT to make a rule under that particular section. The CBDT can make rules only as per those directions, and the rule once framed will then be enforced by a notification in the official gazette. Moving on, we come to a word called circular. Now, what's a circular? Now, to understand the need for circulars, let's understand what are interpretations. For example, if I ask you, what is this? Now, I want you to look at this, because whatever we've done till now, we've talked about a bit about the Act, we've talked a bit about the rules. Now we are talking about circulars and notifications. Of course, as we move on, but I keep telling you, we will be adding knowledge to this knowledge. Now, what is interpretation? You tell me, looking at this, what comes to your mind? I'm sure you said 0. Come on, think again. Yes, it's a circle. Oh, it can be an O as well. Oh, it's the moon. Question is, what is it? Now, if I read it like this, then that thing you saw is now to be read as 0. But if this is what is written along with it, then it's a circle. What happens now? You read it as an O. It can be a ball. It can be a smiley. It's what you can interpret it to be. You see this all across your life, every day. You say something to your friend, suddenly your friend is angry with you. And you're wondering why the friend is angry with you. Then you spend a good time explaining to your friend, no, I did not say it this way, I meant it like this. What has happened is, you've said something, but the other person has interpreted it in a very different way. So interpretation or communication gaps happen to be very, very important in everyday life. As a teacher, I'm trying to explain something to you. If I'm not going to be able to communicate well enough, you might understand something very different from what I'm saying. So look at one small statement. We say good news. Inflation comes to an end. Bhai, khush khabri, good news. Inflation comes to an end, which means what? The prices will either stabilize or start falling. This is good news. What happens if you did not read one small word in between? Let's read it again. Good news on inflation comes to an end. Good news on inflation comes to an end. Now, what does this mean now? This means a khush khabari on inflation. Good news on inflation is over. Which means the inflation is now set to rise again. So if you think about it again, good news, inflation comes to an end. Prices might fall. Good news on inflation comes to an end. The prices will now start rising. So just one small word, you will appreciate this, changes the entire meaning. It becomes a complete opposite. If someone's misreading this word, you've missed the entire meaning of what is written. Thus, it becomes very important for us to read what is written by the finance minister very carefully. Sometimes we might read it not as per he wanted us to read it. Sometimes we might miss reading something. Thus, imagine all across the country, everybody reading that act. Imagine how many different types of meanings we can take out. Now, who is to tell us what is the right meaning? Who is to tell us what was meant when the section was written? This is where circulars come in. So what is the purpose of circulars? The purpose of circulars is to issue, the CBDT again issues circulars, instructions from time to time to clarify the intent of legislature. Again, a very simple example I can give you is, let's say the act says something like this. What is this? Now, one person reading it will say, these are read together, therefore this is 10x. The other person reading it will say, these are read together, it becomes 1 ox. A very simple thing. Now, if the act has forgotten to add a comma here or a comma here, there is no comma written anywhere. Some people in the world, some of us as chartered accountants, as assessees, as people in the department, will interpret it as 10x and some will interpret it as 1 ox. Now, who's going to tell us what to interpret it as? CBDT. So, the CBDT, through its officers, the assessing officer, the CIT will get information on how there are interpretational problems in the world, and based on that they will then issue a circular to clarify the intent of legislature. That means the CBDT will tell us, okay, the person writing the act wrote it with this intention. In case of any ambiguity in the interpretation of the wordings of the act. Now, section 119 of the Income Tax Act provides that all officers and other persons employed in the execution of the act shall observe and follow orders and instructions of the board. So comes the question, are the circulars binding on me as an assessee? Now, section 119 says the circulars issued by CBDT are binding on the department. Which means if the CBDT says this has to be read as 10x, the department has to read it as 10x. The AO cannot say it as 1x. But me as an assessee, I can say that I don't agree with the interpretation of the CBDT. So can I challenge the circular? Now what you have to understand is the right to challenge or the right to file an appeal is not your birthright. Under the Income Tax Act, you can only file an appeal if the Income Tax Act has given you a right in a section to file an appeal. However, since we are all Indian citizens, we have certain fundamental rights under the Constitution of India. One of the rights we have is to file a written petition or a written application in the High Court. Anywhere in India, if somebody does not like something that is happening, you can go and file a writ petition in the High Court. You do not like a speech given by a political leader. You think it is against a particular religion or it is instigating riots. The speech was given, let's say, in Hyderabad. You can go and file a case in Punjab and Haryana against that speech. Where do you get that right? You get that right under the Constitution of India. So, income tax ke under the Income Tax Act, there are certain rights to file an appeal, which we will do in the assessment procedures. If a right is not given under the assessment procedures for the assessee to file an appeal, he cannot. But then he can always follow the constitutional procedures, which are over and above all the acts themselves. So can I challenge the circular given by the CBDT? Yes, you can file a writ petition in the High Court challenging the interpretation of the interpretation given in the circular by the CBDT. But you cannot challenge it under the Income Tax Act. If the High Court quashes that circular, then the circular becomes redundant. But till the time the circular is in force, the department shall give effect to that circular. So we say the instructions of the board are binding on the department. They are not binding on the assessee. They are not binding on the CIT appeals. They are not binding on the ITAT or the courts. The CIT appeals, remember, is a part of the department, yet he has an appellate function. The appellate function cannot be interfered with. As I keep saying, we will do these rules when we do the assessment procedures. Thus, the instructions in favor of the assessee must be followed by the department irrespective of the legality, but instructions adverse to the assessee can be challenged by him as given in the Supreme Court judgment. So there are judgments saying, can an assessee challenge a CBDT circular? Yes, he can in the High Court, and if the High Court does not admit the petition or for some reason is dismissed, we can always file a special leave petition in the Supreme Court. No circular or instruction can go against the provision of the Act. We know that the circular does not override the Act. Now, one of the examples I've given you is, remember 56(2)(7), wherein we are told that gifts received in excess of 50,000 are taxable. Now, long time ago, there was a circular that said that sportsmen जो होते हैं, We know there are professionals and there are amateurs. The professionals, whatever they earn goes as income from business and profession. Now for amateurs, whatever they earn were treated as personal gifts.
So let's read a circular that came in 2014 to understand this concept.
So we say the Central Board of Direct Taxes had issued, पुरानी बात हो रही है, had issued circular number 447 on the 22nd of January 1986, long time back. Maybe some of you were not even born then. In fact, most of you were not born then. Clarifying that awards received by a sportsman who is not a professional will not be liable to tax in his hand, as award will be in the nature of a gift or personal testimonial. So in 1986 it was said that an amateur sportsman, whenever he receives a prize for a tournament, it will be not taxable because it is treated as a personal gift. Now we know now, today you know, that personal gifts are taxable as per 56(2)(7). However, that section was not prevalent in 1986. So he says, the said circular was applicable in a tax regime when gift was not taxable in the hands of the recipient, and with the fundamental change in the manner of treatment of gift by amending the definition of income under section 2 subsection 24 and insertion of clauses 5, 6 and then 7, these are now not relevant, in subsection 2 of 56. So as we said, 56(2)(7). In the Income Tax Act with effect from 145, the said 447 had therefore become inapplicable with the change in law and is to be treated as overridden by the aforesaid statutory provisions. So CBDT says that there is ambiguity. Certain amateur sportsmen are saying that as per circular number 447 coming in 86, whatever prize I win is exempt because it is written in the circular. However, the Act has been amended in 2005. The Act says now personal gifts are taxable. And we know the circular cannot override the Act. But there is still confusion. People don't know what to do. So the CBDT now in 2014, 9 years after insertion of 56(2), clarifies that circular 447 is no longer applicable. And one of the last terms that is important for our understanding of the Act basic is notifications. I think by now we've understood, hopefully you've understood better, that notification is a change in the Act. We know Finance Act come once a year, budget once a year, amendments made once a year. What happens beta? If the finance minister wants to make a change in the mid of the year, he wants to add a section, he wants to change the rate, he wants to delete a section, does he wait for the next Finance Act to come? We would love to do that because we don't want too many changes too fast. But he can make a change in the Act by issuing a notification. So notifications are enforceable changes in the Act. To add or remove the provisions of the statute, which means the Act, to grant any exemptions, to implement rules framed by the CBDT. And if a notification comes on a particular date, it is effective from that date. So if it is on 1/10/13, it is effective from 1/10/13.
One of the notifications that came in 2013 introducing commodities transaction tax. Let's have a look.
We all know commodity trading is becoming common. You have trading in gold, silver, pulses, food items. All these are now over recognized stock exchanges. MCX stock exchange being one of them. So, to make sure commodities transaction tax is collected, the procedures, the rules, So now, as per notification number 45, 2013, they have given us the chapter under which the rules for commodities transaction tax will be levied. So there is a chapter 7 of Finance Act 2013 which gives you commodities transaction tax, which is not a part of the Income Tax Act, but its effect will be seen in the Income Tax Act when we go and do business and profession and capital gains. So summing it up first, the Act is as written in 1961. It is divided into sections, subsections, clauses. An exception to a rule is given as provided that statements. Generally, the meaning of words given in the Income Tax Act must be read with their definition under section 2. However, if a word is to be defined separately in the Act, then it has to be given in the explanation to that section. Then if the Act requires elaboration, the CBDT will frame rules, which will then be enforced by the central government by notification in the Official Gazette. Can rules change the Act? No. Can rules or do rules have the force of the law? Yes, because section 295 of the Act empowers CBDT to make the rules. Therefore, rules are part of the Income Tax Act as we know it. Can a rule framed under one section be read with another section? The answer is no. If there is ambiguity in the reading of the Act, what do? We get circulars from CBDT. Are those circulars binding on the department? Yes. Are they binding on the assessee? No. Can I challenge a circular? Yes. By filing a writ petition in the High Court or a special leave petition in the Supreme Court. Can notifications change the law? Yes. Notifications are changes in the Act made by the government.